couple different types of ways to go from what you have today, and that is a rental park, and move to a situation where you all own your park. Some of those ways of doing it are expensive. Some of those ways are not so expensive. Some of the ways of doing that can be crafted in a way where you all can take advantage of special financing that's available and special grant money that's available from the state of California, from the federal government, and a lot of other sources that maintain affordability within your park. So let me then get back to the flyer that was circulated. One of the very first things that we put up there was, what is a 501c3 nonprofit, I forgot exactly what terminology I used, housing cooperative, or an entity. What is that? How is that different? What does that really mean? We understand, because we of course have done some of our homework before just coming on out here, we understand that of course this is a senior park, which means that probably many of you are on fixed and limited income sources, which means I would suspect that very few of you have the ability to write a big check. I would suspect that very few of you have an interest or desire in raising your rent significantly. Probably not something that you're terribly interested in. And so for that reason, there are a lot of other forms of ownership, forms of resident-owned parks, which require one of those two things to take place. Yet there's a very different form of park ownership by a resident group that's quite a bit different from that. And that's a form of ownership which is referred to as a co-op. But it's a very special type of co-op. It's called a limited equity housing cooperative. And a limited equity housing cooperative is a non-profit entity. And now let me go back to my reference to that 501c3 tax-exempt entity. What that means is, you as a group would come together with our assistance, and you would form a very special entity with the sole purpose of maintaining affordability within this park, maintaining affordable rents within the park, maintaining affordable housing within the park, and maintaining a low cost of ownership. And if you can do that, and this limited equity housing cooperative is a special vehicle that California law authorizes, if you can do that, what the federal government says to you is, you qualify as a non-profit, tax-exempt entity, also referred to as a 501c3. Any of you ever made a deduction to made a contribution to a charity, whether it's a church or the AIDS Foundation or the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation, similar to that, and they give you a little receipt which says, you know, you've contributed $10 or $20, and because of that, you can take a tax deduction. The reason why those entities are able to do that is because they are also a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, meaning they've completed a somewhat sophisticated and complicated application with IRS, and IRS has said, the Internal Revenue has said, the service has said, you qualify for tax-exempt status. You are a charity. And there are a couple different types of charities out there. Some of them are charities that are formed for educational purposes, some for social purposes, and some, like a limited equity housing cooperative, are formed for the purpose of providing and maintaining affordable housing. And that's the type of vehicle that, if it's something that interests you, we would consider doing here at the park. Let me start with let me take a step back and explain how this housing cooperative would work. If, and I say if there was a high enough interest level within the park, then what we would do is we would spend some time at our expense, and actually not my expense, but my client's expense, going out and trying to get all the approvals we would need, getting that tax-exempt qualification from the IRS, forming that nonprofit corporation, and at the end of the day, we'd have this limited equity housing cooperative, and we would come back to all of you and say, is it something you're interested in? and we'd be able to tell you what it would cost to participate. Oftentimes that initial share price is $500, $1,000, maybe $1,500. And then you would know what your rent is on a go-forward basis, which again is probably going to be very close to what you're paying right now in rents. So then how does this work? Well, so now you have a good number of you who've decided, I think this is interesting to me and I do want to participate. You all become members of this housing cooperative. As a housing cooperative and as members of that housing cooperative, you get one very important thing. Actually, you get a couple of very important things. One very important thing is you have a right to vote. And what does that right to vote get you? Not trouble. The right to vote gives you decision-making power. It gives you the right to decide to elect a board of directors and officers. It gives you the right to participate in the governance of your community, which means you get to decide how your park is run. Where do you all want to spend your rents? Do you want to spend your rents on more social activities during the month? Do you want to spend your rents on fewer social activities during the month? Do you want to spend them on perhaps improving the clubhouse or the pool area or all the other things that you could possibly desire to do? Now, one of the things you might say is, well, that sounds nice, but I'm not a property manager and I don't really have an interest in managing a mobile home park. I can assure you that just because you become an owner or a member of the co-op, of a limited equity housing cooperative, you still do very much need and rely upon on-site managers to help continue to run the day-to-day activities of the park just as it happens today. The only difference is that you're now owners. You're now owners of your park. What about some of the other benefits? Some of the other benefits are, as an owner, what we tend to see in California over time is that the value of your home becomes more stable. It becomes more stable, and it actually tends to go up. And the reason why is couplefold. First of all, anyone who lives within a park right now is always subject to what? Increasing rents over time. Every year. And as rents go up, what does that mean if you wanted to sell your home? Someone's probably willing to pay a little bit less for your home because they only have limited resources, and the more they have to pay in rent means the less they might be willing to pay for your home. When a park becomes a resident-owned park, you eliminate that unpredictability of rents. You eliminate that annual pressure to increase rents every month, which means you return stability to the value of your home. Number two, I think you actually now have available to you a greater pool of potential purchasers because as a buyer of a home, I want that certainty. I want that certainty as to what is going to happen in the future as opposed to an unpredictable level, an unpredictable result in the future. What we demonstrate to the Internal Revenue Service is that each member agrees that their membership share will always remain affordable. Earlier I mentioned that perhaps a membership share is valued at $500 or $1,000 in the beginning. That represents your piece of ownership in the land. There are 168 spaces here within the park, is that right? 165, 164. The way this housing cooperative would work is if there are 165 spaces, there would be 165 memberships. And for everyone who decides that they want to become a member, they get the right to, just as they do today, they get that very important right to own and occupy their space forever. As long as they live here, it's theirs. And as long as they're a member of the co-op, they get that very important voting right. They get that very important protection from increases in rent over time. That very important protection associated with being an owner of the park and owning their space.